Anxiety. We've all felt it. Millions struggle with it, but if somebody was to ask you, what is anxiety? You may struggle really trying to explain what it is. In this video, I'm going to share with you the 5 types of anxiety and some of the underlying neurological causes that you may have never considered when it comes to what's actually causing your anxiety in the first place. Hey, I'm Dr. Sam McDonald. I'm a brain health expert, and this channel is dedicated to helping you rewire your brain so that you can live a better life. If you love this content, please hit that like button and subscribe so that you get the notifications for each week's new video. It's estimated that 40 million Americans struggle with some form of anxiety every single day. Now that is a huge number. It's also a really sad number because if you're a person who struggles with some form of anxiety, you know how it can interfere and possibly even destroy your life and the expression of really who it is that you want to be. You know, maybe you're not able to connect with your friends. Maybe you're not able to connect with your significant other, or just maybe you're missing out on watching your children grow up right in front of your eyes. So whatever it may be, whatever it's interfering in your life, let's talk about what these 5 different forms of anxiety are so that you can start to get a better understanding of what these triggers are and what could be the actual cause of it. Because there's a rule in neurology, the brain can't heal what it's not aware of. That's a very, very critical thing. You have to have awareness for healing to occur. So if you can identify your triggers or the main issues, you can really start to get control over your anxiety and possibly get rid of it for good. So the first one we're going to talk about is what's called generalized anxiety disorder. It's really characterized by chronic anxiety, worry, or even muscular tension. So a lot of people that struggle with generalized anxiety disorder will often talk about they have a very tight neck or very tight shoulders, or their low back just always feels very tight and rigid, or they get headaches often. It's usually going to be very associated with a number of physical complaints. And there's really little to nothing that provokes it. So generalized anxiety disorder, people wake up and they're just like, oh, yep, I'm anxious, or they're going for a walk, yep, I'm anxious, or I'm driving the car, I'm anxious. Just whatever it is that they're doing, there's really no cause for it. They just have this here all the time, almost like a shadow. So typically what we see in the office with people that struggle with generalized anxiety disorder is going to be a overactive sympathetic nervous system, aka sympathetic dominance. So your nervous system is really made up of 2 different states of how you function. You have your parasympathetic, aka your resting, digesting, and healing part of your nervous system. And then the other side of that, you have your sympathetic, aka your fight or flight system. So your parasympathetic is really known for resting, digesting, relaxing, and healing. So that's what we call chill mode. The opposite side of that is a sympathetic, fight or flight, constantly wound up, think of being chased by a bear or a tiger all the time. That's going to be that sympathetic nervous system. So the brain's constantly on search for some kind of threat, some kind of danger, and it's always perceiving a threat, even though maybe there's nothing there that's actually going to cause it. So that's typically what we see with people that struggle with generalized anxiety disorder. So the next one we're going to talk about is obsessive compulsive disorder, otherwise known as OCD. And OCD is characterized by recurrent unwanted thoughts, those are the obsessions, and or repetitive behaviors, those are the compulsions. So you have thoughts and you have actions. Now, when we classically think of OCD, we think of the action part of this, and that's going to be like the hand washing, the hand wringing, opening and closing doors, turning on and off lights. Really, there can be an infinite number of different actions or combinations of things that could be characterized as OCD, but the often overlooked piece is the thought part of OCD, and this is where a lot of our clients that we see with this is going to be what we call the what if game. And these recurrent thoughts get into their head, and it's like, well, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens? Well, what if this happens bad? And it's usually more on the negative side. It's typically not, what if good things happen? What if this good thing happens? Well, what if this awesome thing happens? It doesn't typically go that way. It's going to be, well, what if this negative thing happens? Well, then what if that follows this? And what if this? And it's just this dark, deep spiral that somebody's going to sink into because their brain is constantly playing this negative what if game. So the part of the brain that we usually see associated with OCD is going to be this part here called the anterior cingulate gyrus. And it's part of the brain called the limbic system. That's your fight or flight system in there. And the anterior cingulate is mostly associated with emotions and pain. It does a lot of different things, but the 2 most common ones are emotions and pain. And so when we see this with a lot of people, we call it a hot cingulate or a hot midline, because we're looking right in the middle of the brain. And that's where the what if game is really going to be generated from. So when this anterior cingulate gets too over-aroused or too hot, that's when this what if game can start to happen, or even some of these other compulsive behaviors too are going to generate from this particular area. So next we're going to talk about panic disorder. And panic disorder is characterized as unexpected and repeated episodes of intense fear, usually accompanied by some kind of physical symptom, something like chest pain, heart palpitations, shortness of breath, dizziness, and oftentimes GI discomfort, things like constipation or diarrhea. So the most common example that people think of when it comes to panic disorder are panic attacks. And if you've never had a panic attack before, I can assure you from personal experience, it is literally one of the most terrifying and surreal experiences that you may ever have in your entire life. Now, I'll never forget the panic attack that I had when I was in undergrad. I was, literally walking from my dorm to my class on a very regular day. There was nothing that happened that morning to set me off. I'm just walking through the quad. It's a bright, sunny day out, and all of a sudden, like a lightning strike, I'm hit with this intense fear, this tunnel vision, shortness of breath, chest tightness, palms just broke out in a cold sweat in the middle of a warm day. And I literally thought that I was dying. I really had no clue what was going on at that particular moment. And it truly felt literally like I was going to die. I had no clue what this was. And like a lightning strike, it was over in an instant. It just came and it went. So what happens in the brain with these particular situations is you have an overactive amygdala and a limbic system. Now we call this, jokingly in our office, an asshole amygdala and limbic hijack. And when you have an asshole amygdala, what happens is it's constantly looking for threat and for danger. It's primed for that. And the more that it's looking for threat and for danger, the more that it's going to spiral itself up. And so I'll be called an asshole because it just takes over everything. And it doesn't let anything else get a word in. So it's constantly looking for threat and for danger, and that can be something as, oh, that garbage can's dangerous. There's going to be something that pops out of it. Or, oh, that's a dark hallway. Someone down there is going to get me if I walk down it. It's literally the most common things that for some people, there's no fear in it at all, but when that amygdala is really wound up, it's going to produce fear in even the most common situations. Next is PTSD, otherwise known as post-traumatic stress disorder. And PTSD typically develops after situations where either your life was threatened or physical harm occurred, or maybe both. The typical types of situations that we think of are going to be things like war and rape. Now, PTSD can also develop from other situations, not necessarily these big events like this, but can also be from chronic low levels of stress in which the person was vulnerable. Now, what I mean by that is the person may be susceptible to these different stresses and they don't feel like they really have the capacity to properly handle it. So an example of this may be a woman going through a pregnancy where she doesn't feel supported, she doesn't know how she's going to take this life-changing event on, or it could be a child growing up in a house of neglect. So typically what we see in the brain with PTSD is going to be what's called a blunted alpha response. So we're looking at brain waves in this particular situation, and we're looking at a brain wave in the back of the brain with eyes open and with eyes closed. Now, your brain naturally has the ability to handle trauma. We naturally have the ability to adapt, and we naturally have the ability to be able to process that trauma, consciously and subconsciously realize, hey, this situation is no longer happening. I'm no longer in danger. I can let that go in a sense. I may not forget it because I need to keep that situation memory handy in case I'm in another similar situation and I know what to do. But the previous traumatic event is no longer causing neurological stress. So what we'll typically see with the eyes open and eyes closed is this alpha response not happening, meaning that the person still neurologically is compromised from this particular trauma. It means that the brain is still holding it in the background, much like you would have an app open up on the back of your phone, but you're not actively looking at it. So the last one we're going to talk about is social anxiety disorder, and this is characterized by overwhelming anxiety and excessive self-consciousness in social situations. So the typical thought process of somebody who's going to be struggling with social anxiety is they're out in a group of people and like, why is everybody looking at me? Or are those people talking about me over there? Or are those people looking at me over there? And there's this excessive stuckness on the self versus just observing and naturally seeing what's going on in the environment around you. And this isn't just the typical, like, I'm uncomfortable meeting new people type of anxiety. We all get that. This is really characterized as a person literally cannot function in these particular social situations. And it may be large groups of people, like going to a concert, or just there's too much going on. But it can also be in more intimate situations, whether it's a small group of friends or even somebody having to give a presentation to a group of people. All those can lead to this social anxious feeling because a person's not able to process information appropriately. Now, typically what we'll see in the brain with this situation is problems with the eyes, and in particular, problems being able to track. So our eyes are the biggest window into our brain, and they do a whole lot. But one of the biggest things that they do, or their biggest jobs, is to be able to track things in our environment, to watch them and look at them, and be able to perceive how far they are or what that particular thing is doing. So for example, somebody moving through a crowd who has problems being able to track things appropriately is not going to be able to look at all these different groups of people, see who's coming towards them, who's going away, who's going left, who's going right. They're not going to be able to track all that as efficiently as a person who has eyes that work well. And so typically the brain's going to then fire up the defense systems because it's becoming overwhelmed, because it's trying to process too much information while having too little bandwidth to do so. So think of trying to download a HD video while having a dial-up internet connection. Your brain's trying to process and do all this information as fast as it can in this environment where the stimuli is very, very high, but it's not able to because the actual software in the eyes, the function of the eyes, is not working as well as it should. So the beauty in understanding these underlying neurological mechanisms is that by knowing if there's an actual problem in the brain, that problem can oftentimes be corrected. So there's this amazing principle in neuroscience called neuroplasticity. And what neuroplasticity means is that the brain can rewire itself. So these particular neurological habits or mechanisms that maybe your brain has learned, it can unlearn, and it can learn new ones, it can learn better ones. And when that happens, oftentimes people that we see, their anxiety is lessened, and in many cases, it's completely eliminated. And for so many people, that is truly life-changing because now they have hope again. They have hope that their brain can be changed, that their condition is not a lifelong permanent sentence. It truly can be corrected as long as the underlying neurology is truly understood. So on that note, you should be healthy by choice, not by chance. And for that reason, I will see you on the next video.